In a silent dawn, Jeff Bezos stares at his reflection on the glass wall of his Seattle penthouse. The world outside seems to collapse under endless conflicts and broken promises. For the first time in years, he feels something no corporate report ever captured, a deep, unsettling helplessness toward human chaos. Across the globe, Captain Ryan Alvarez walks through a field still scarred by fresh fire. He thinks about the months away from his daughter, the sound of Lily's voice surviving only in old recordings, and the invisible weight of each order he gives. The rising sun blends dust with hope, yet neither truly reaches him. Jeff opens a confidential report sent by Dr. Carl Morton, filled with cold numbers representing real suffering. A simple, absurd question grows in him. What if money could actually stop a war, not to buy weapons, but to silence them? What if a single check could bring every soldier home? Jeff takes a slow breath as he realizes this wouldn't be just a transaction, but a gamble capable of rewriting his own fate. If he signed that check, he would challenge governments, egos, and borders, and nothing guaranteed he would live long enough to witness the outcome. Jeff woke before sunrise, dragged from sleep by a quiet tension pulsing behind his ribs. The city outside was still dark, the lights scattered like distant signals begging for attention. He walked to the window, feeling the cold glass against his fingertips as the report from Carl Morton waited behind him, an unspoken demand wrapped in numbers. He returned to the table and skimmed the pages again, though he already knew every figure by heart. The cost of stopping the conflict was staggering, but still less than the cost of letting it burn for another decade. Each line of data felt like a human voice trapped inside cold ink, reaching out for someone powerful enough to listen. Jeff sat down slowly, thinking of the last time he felt fear not tied to business or competition, but to the fragility of the world itself. He remembered how success had once felt like armor, a shield against the senselessness of reality, yet now that armor seemed thinner than paper. Something in him resisted the idea of walking away. Far from Seattle, Ryan Alvarez tightened the straps of his vest as dust swirled around the ruins he patrolled. His boots crunched over shattered concrete as he scanned the horizon for movement. The silence felt dangerous, as if the ground itself held its breath waiting to betray him. He clenched his jaw and kept walking. Ryan's thoughts drifted to his daughter, her small voice asking when he would come home. He carried those memories like a pocket-sized miracle, something bright enough to survive the darkness around him. But every day he stayed in that war zone made the thread connecting him to her feel thinner, almost frayed. Lily Matthews stood at her classroom window, staring at the empty playground where laughter once bounced between the walls. She tried to keep her days full, burying her fear under lesson plans and quiet routines, yet every headline tightened her chest. She wondered if Ryan still carried the photo she sent before he left. She sat at her desk and folded her hands, feeling the weight of hope pressing against the uncertainty she lived with. She prayed not for victory or politics, but simply for Ryan's safety. She wanted a world where soldiers didn't return broken or silent, where children didn't grow up measuring time in deployments. Back in Seattle, Jeff opened a live feed showing the border zone where Ryan was stationed. The flickering images felt unreal, as if the screen acted as a brittle barrier between his comfort and their danger. He imagined what it meant for someone to walk through that wreckage every day with no guarantee of tomorrow. He leaned back and wondered when money stopped feeling like a tool and began resembling a responsibility. People argued that wealth isolates, but Jeff felt the opposite. It exposed him. It made the world louder. And this time, silence would cost more than action, even if action carried its own storms. Carl Morton paced his office as he waited for Jeff's response. He knew the proposal was controversial, a financial maneuver that would undermine traditional power. But he had spent years watching treaties fail and negotiations collapse, and he believed this plan was the only option left that didn't require more blood. Carl adjusted his glasses and reread the final section detailing how one strategic payment could disarm the conflict's core incentives. He felt the weight of his own fear pressing down, not of failure, but of the backlash that might follow. If this worked, it would rewrite the rules. If it didn't, it would break them. Ryan crouched behind a burnt-out vehicle as distant gunfire cracked across the valley. He took a slow breath, focusing on the rhythm that kept him sane. Inhale, exhale, move forward. He wondered how many more days he could endure this repetition before something inside him snapped or simply faded. When the shooting stopped, he stood and saw a child running across the rubble, barefoot and terrified. He sprinted toward the boy, scooping him into his arms before another explosion echoed nearby. The boy trembled against his chest, reminding him of everything he wanted to return to, everything this war threatened to erase. Jeff replayed the footage of similar encounters captured by drones, each one a reminder that behind every conflict were ordinary lives shattered by decisions they never made. He hated the idea of stepping into the role of savior, yet he hated even more the idea of standing idle while destruction continued unchecked. He picked up a pen and hovered over the line that would authorize the unprecedented payment. He felt both the weight of history and the lightness of a single signature. He thought about Ryan, about the boy in the ruins, about Lily waiting by a window, about Carl fighting systems larger than himself. Thunder rolled across Seattle as if the sky sensed his hesitation. Jeff inhaled deeply, feeling the shift inside him, a slow alignment of purpose and fear. Whether he liked it or not, he had arrived at the center of a decision capable of reshaping an entire conflict. And maybe, just maybe, the world needed someone reckless enough to try. He signed. The ink spread across the page like a fuse, quiet but unstoppable. Jeff placed the pen down carefully, understanding that nothing would ever be simple again. Outside, the first rays of morning light broke through the clouds, as if the world itself had been waiting for this moment. Somewhere far away, Ryan looked up at the same sky, unaware that a signature across the ocean had just begun to change the fate of every soldier in the field. He felt a strange calm settle in his bones, an intuition that something massive was shifting beneath the surface, something he could not yet name. If this story made you think, subscribe for the next one. Jeff stood in the dim light of his office as news began spreading through discreet diplomatic channels. The payment had been received, verified and quietly redirected to the entities capable of freezing the conflict's financial arteries. Yet the world outside still looked unchanged, unaware that a silent shift had begun beneath its surface. Ryan woke to a strange stillness rolling across the front lines. No distant blasts, no scattered rifle cracks, just a wind moving like a cautious whisper through abandoned structures. He stepped out of his tent and scanned the horizon, noticing groups of soldiers watching one another with uncertainty instead of hostility. Carl Morton entered his office with trembling hands, unsure whether he felt relief or dread. Messages poured into his encrypted inbox, some from allies congratulating the bold strategy, others from officials accusing him of orchestrating a reckless interference. He ignored them all and focused on the screens mapping troop movements. Lily stood in the hallway outside her classroom, noticing her students arriving quieter than usual. News stations hinted at a sudden drop in battle activity, though no one could confirm anything. She clung to that fragile ambiguity like a lifeline, hoping the silence growing overseas was not just a temporary illusion. Jeff met with a small circle of advisors who warned him that such an operation, even if successful, would invite scrutiny and retaliation. He listened calmly, aware that influence came with invisible traps. But he also sensed that a window had opened, and if no one stepped through it now, it might close forever. Ryan walked past a checkpoint where soldiers from both sides stared at each other with the uneasy wonder of men unsure if they were allowed to breathe. He felt the tension loosening inside him, not in celebration but in disbelief. He wondered if the lull was a trap or the first fragile sign of something greater. Carl watched the data streams flatten as reports confirmed supply chains collapsing in synchronized fashion. Without funding and external fuel, the engines of war began stalling one by one. He exhaled slowly, realizing that the plan was working precisely because it attacked what no ideology could resist: the lack of resources. Lily sat at her desk and opened her phone to reread an old message from Ryan, imagining his voice wrapped around each word. She had grown used to protecting herself from hope, yet this morning felt different. A soft optimism crept into her breathing, tentative but real, carrying her through her lessons. Jeff walked along the waterfront to clear his mind. He could feel the eyes of the world beginning to turn toward him, even if only in speculation. He wondered how long it would take for the truth to surface, and whether he was prepared for the storm that transparency would bring. But retreat felt impossible now. Ryan approached a small medical station where a medic whispered that ceasefire negotiations were being discussed. The phrase ceasefire felt alien, almost forbidden, yet it echoed in his head like a melody he had forgotten he loved. He sat on a crate and allowed himself one long, steady breath. Carl received confirmation that several field commanders were advising their units to hold fire until further instruction. He leaned over his desk, overwhelmed by the surreal possibility that a signature across the ocean had shifted the momentum more effectively than months of failed talks. He whispered a silent thank you to no one in particular. Lily stepped outside during lunch break and watched clouds drift across the sky. She imagined Ryan seeing the same sky from somewhere far away. For the first time in many months, she allowed herself to picture him walking through their front door, not as a dream, but as a future she could almost touch. Jeff attended a closed-door briefing, where intelligence analysts outlined the geopolitical ripples beginning to form. Some nations celebrated the unexpected halt, others plotted ways to regain leverage. Jeff absorbed every detail, aware that the world rarely accepted peace without questioning who paid for it and why. Ryan wandered through a quiet stretch of road once scarred by constant shelling. Today the dust settled peacefully around him. He knelt, running his fingers through the soil, feeling the earth no longer trembling beneath him. He whispered a small prayer that the silence would hold, even if he could not fully trust it yet. Carl prepared a statement he hoped would frame the narrative before misinformation spread. He chose his words carefully, emphasizing humanitarian outcomes rather than the financial mechanism behind them. He knew some would call it overreach, but he believed that history would judge intentions more fairly than politics. Lily spent the evening by her window watching the town slow into twilight. She received a message from a parent saying that the news claimed a coordinated stand-down was imminent. She pressed her hand to her heart, afraid to believe too quickly, yet unable to stop the warmth rising inside her. Jeff returned to his office as dusk painted the city in gold and shadow. He considered the possibility that peace funded by one man could be interpreted as control rather than compassion. Still, he felt an undeniable sense that he had taken a necessary risk. Some responsibilities were not chosen, but inherited by circumstance. Ryan gathered with his unit as orders finally arrived. Hold position, no engagement unless necessary. The words felt like a miracle disguised in military language. He closed his eyes and let the announcement sink in. For the first time in too many nights, he allowed himself to imagine going home. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs hope. Jeff watched global broadcasts try to explain the sudden stillness spreading across the conflict zone. Analysts debated theories while governments issued vague statements, yet none of them understood the true cause. Jeff felt a strange detachment, as if the world were rearranging itself just out of reach of his control. Ryan walked across the quiet terrain, noticing how even the air seemed lighter. His unit moved cautiously, unsure whether to trust the calm now settling over the land. The absence of gunfire rang louder than the explosions ever did. It left him uneasy, but also filled with a longing that made his chest tighten. Carl sat at his desk, studying fresh intelligence reports, confirming that armed groups were dissolving their operations due to lack of support. He recognized the fragility of the moment. Peace held like thin glass, strong enough to reflect hope but weak enough to shatter with one careless move. Lily sat in the teacher's lounge watching emergency updates scroll across her phone. Each line hinted at breakthroughs in ceasefire talks. She tried to keep her emotions steady, but every notification felt like a flicker of sunlight through a door that had been closed for too long. She took a slow breath and held it. Jeff met with legal teams who tried to outline the possible consequences of his decision. They warned him that nations might attempt to challenge or restrict his influence. Jeff heard their concerns, but felt something steadier rising inside him, a conviction that money only matters when used with real purpose. Ryan helped secure a temporary shelter, where displaced families waited for transport. As he guided people inside, he felt his own exhaustion pressing heavier than usual. He saw faces marked by grief and resilience, and he wondered how many of them would survive the return to normal life once the chaos fully stopped. Carl spoke with humanitarian leaders, preparing to enter regions that had been unreachable for months. They thanked him for pushing a plan that gave them safer passage. He accepted the gratitude quietly, knowing he was only one piece of a vast chain of decisions that stretched far beyond any individual. Lily returned home after work and sat beside her bed, listening to the gentle hum of the neighborhood settling at dusk. She held her phone tightly, half expecting a message to appear. The possibility of hearing from Ryan again felt closer than it ever had. She whispered a promise to stay strong. Jeff climbed the stairs to the rooftop of his building. The night wrapped around him with a clarity he had not felt in years. He thought about the weight of power and the strange loneliness it carried. Yet tonight that loneliness felt purposeful, as if he had stepped onto a path no one else was willing to walk. Ryan lay on his cot, staring at the canvas ceiling of the tent. He replayed the last few days in his mind, still wary of surprises. But beneath that caution lived a quiet gratitude. For the first time, he felt close to breaking the cycle of violence that had shaped his life for too long. Carl reviewed logistical projections for the coming weeks. If everything continued moving in this direction, humanitarian operations could begin full scale. He allowed himself one moment of relief, understanding that progress was rarely neat or predictable. Yet the signs of change were unmistakable. Lily prepared dinner and tried to distract herself with small routines. She set the table, washed the dishes, and kept the lights low. Her thoughts drifted constantly to Ryan. She imagined him standing somewhere under the same stars, maybe feeling the same cautious hope flickering inside her. Jeff received a private message from an international mediator thanking him indirectly for his rumored involvement. No names were used and no details were mentioned, yet the meaning was clear. People were beginning to connect the dots. Jeff felt a mixture of fear and pride swell quietly within him. Ryan inspected the perimeter one last time before resting. The sky above was vast and quiet, no longer bruised by smoke or fire. He felt a wave of emotion he had avoided for months. It was not joy, not yet, but something gentler, a soft acceptance that maybe survival meant more than endurance. Carl turned off the lights in his office and sat in the darkness. He listened to the faint sounds of distant traffic and felt a strange balance inside. He had helped set something massive in motion, and now the world was learning to adjust to it. History often began with decisions no one expected. Lily sat near her window, watching the moon climb above the rooftops. She thought of everything she had endured since Ryan left. The long nights, the unanswered questions, the constant fear. But tonight felt different. It felt like a door creaking open after years of silence. Jeff returned to his desk, staring at the signed document that had set everything in motion. He wondered how long it would take before the world realized that peace could come from unexpected places. The thought made him smile faintly. Maybe the greatest disruptions were the ones driven by compassion. Ryan closed his eyes as fatigue finally pulled him towards sleep. He let himself imagine walking through his front door and lifting his daughter into his arms. For the first time it felt possible. Not a dream, but a future waiting for him on the other side of this quiet turning point. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs hope. Jeff woke to an avalanche of messages from diplomats requesting private conversations. Each one carried the same cautious tone, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile shift unfolding across continents. He sipped his coffee slowly, feeling the weight of visibility pressing closer than ever before. Ryan stood near the edge of the base, watching evacuation vehicles roll into position. Families boarded with quiet relief, while soldiers assisted with patient hands. The movement felt surreal, like watching the end of a storm he had spent years trapped inside. He wondered what life would feel like without constant alertness. Carl sat through a long stream of conference calls, with officials demanding explanations for the rapid halt in violence. Some praised the outcome, while others feared the precedent. He responded with neutral poise, aware that transparency had limits when the truth carried explosive implications. Lily woke before sunrise, unable to sleep, as news outlets broadcast headlines hinting at an imminent full ceasefire. She walked through her quiet living room, touching objects that had carried her through lonely nights. Each step felt like shedding a layer of fear she had worn for far too long. Jeff met with his closest advisors in a small, soundproof room. They discussed scenarios ranging from public admiration to political fallout. Jeff listened carefully, though his thoughts drifted to the soldiers whose lives were changing in real time. Whatever consequences awaited him felt secondary to that human reality. Ryan assisted a medic treating a wounded civilian who had been caught in a blast days before the peace shift began. The man thanked him with trembling hands, gratitude pouring through eyes exhausted by survival. Ryan felt something loosen in his chest, a small part of him daring to believe redemption was possible. Carl reviewed ground-level reports showing former combat zones being cleared for humanitarian teams. The pace of progress felt almost unreal. He leaned back in his chair, knowing the coming days would define whether this moment became a turning point or a temporary pause in history's repetitive cycle. Lily prepared her classroom for the day, placing books neatly on desks and adjusting chairs with gentle attention. Her students arrived buzzing with cautious excitement as whispers of peace traveled through the school halls. She smiled softly, letting their hope warm her more than any headline could. Jeff stepped outside into a cold breeze, walking along a shaded garden terrace attached to his building. The air felt different, lighter somehow. He thought about how rare it was for the world to collectively exhale. Even if they did not know the source, he felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing humanity breathe. Ryan sat with his platoon as word spread that home rotations would begin soon. The announcement carried stunned silence at first, followed by murmurs of disbelief. He watched his fellow soldiers process the news, each expression revealing a mix of exhaustion and yearning too deep to name. Carl drafted a confidential memo outlining strategies to support long-term stability. He understood that peace required more than the absence of conflict. It demanded infrastructure, resources, and trust. He felt a responsibility to ensure that this brief window of mercy did not dissolve into old patterns. Lily paused during her lunch break to check her phone, half expecting a message from Ryan to appear. Instead, she found a news alert stating that several major factions had formally agreed to halt all operations. The words sent a shiver through her, equal parts relief and disbelief. Jeff returned to his desk, where a small stack of letters waited, handwritten by strangers who believed he might be involved in the unfolding peace. None stated it directly, yet the tone of gratitude was unmistakable. He read each one carefully, feeling a quiet humility wash over him. Ryan walked toward a communication tent where soldiers formed a line, hoping to send messages home. As he waited, he rehearsed what he might say to Lily. His hands trembled slightly. War had taught him to endure pain, but peace forced him to confront the tenderness he had buried to survive. Carl turned his attention to the international reactions streaming across multiple screens. Some leaders celebrated the unexpected harmony, others questioned its legitimacy. Carl understood that the world struggled to accept outcomes without clear authors. Yet he also sensed that mystery sometimes protected the truth. Lily returned home and opened the windows, letting fresh air fill the room. She stood in the center of her living room, imagining Ryan walking through the door. The idea no longer felt like fantasy. It felt like a memory waiting to happen, suspended just beyond the present moment. Jeff ended his evening on the rooftop again, staring out at the city lights. He wondered how much of human conflict stemmed from choices made out of fear. If wealth could interrupt violence, what else could compassion disrupt? He felt a small spark ignite within him, urging him to continue challenging the impossible. Ryan finally reached the front of the communication line and typed a message with steady hands. He kept it simple, but every word carried the weight of years apart. When he pressed send, his heart thudded with a mixture of fear and hope. For the first time, he truly believed he was coming home. If this story made you smile, leave a like. It helps us reach more people. Jeff sat alone in the quiet of his office as dawn stretched softly across the city. The world was beginning to settle into the new rhythm shaped by his single decision. Reports showed troop withdrawals, reopened borders, and humanitarian aid flowing freely. Yet he knew the coming days would reveal whether peace could endure without tension snapping it apart. Ryan stood among soldiers preparing to depart the base for the last time. The familiar sounds of engines rumbling carried a different weight now, filled not with dread, but with anticipation. He watched the landscape one more time, memorizing the horizon that had held his fears and his strength through so many long months. Carl reviewed the official statement, announcing the complete ceasefire. The language was cautious, yet hopeful. crafted to unite fractured perspectives. He understood the importance of wording in shaping public belief. He hoped the world would see this ending, not as a coincidence, but as a turning point created by human courage. Lily woke with her phone still in her hand, having fallen asleep reading Ryan's brief message from the night before. The simple words felt like a window thrown open. She moved through her home with a new softness, noticing the small details she had ignored, while grief and uncertainty crowded her thoughts. Jeff met with a mediator who hinted that governments were quietly discussing how to address the abrupt loss of influence over the conflict. Jeff listened carefully and responded with steady calm. This was the price of change, he thought. Peace carried consequences just as war did, only quieter and less destructive. Ryan boarded the transport vehicle, feeling vibrations rise beneath him as the engine roared to life. He watched the base shrink behind him, a place that had reshaped him in ways he did not yet understand. Relief and grief mixed inside him, forming something indescribable but deeply human. Carl prepared a briefing for international partners, focusing on rebuilding efforts. He highlighted the need for schools, clean water, and medical outreach. He felt a swell of determination as he envisioned communities rebuilding their futures. Peace was only the beginning. Restoring dignity was the true challenge. Lily drove to work with the radio playing continuous updates on the peace agreements. For the first time, she did not turn down the volume. She let the words fill every corner of the car, absorbing hope she had long feared to feel. She whispered a quiet thank you, not knowing whom she thanked. Jeff walked through a museum he had funded years before, stopping in front of a large, abstract painting. Its chaotic strokes reminded him of the world before the ceasefire. He wondered whether humanity would learn from this moment, or simply resume old patterns. A quiet voice inside him urged him to believe in better. Ryan leaned his head back against the seat as the aircraft lifted into the sky. He watched the earth fall away beneath him, feeling a strange sensation like stepping out of a long nightmare. He tried to imagine himself laughing again, resting again, living without the constant ache of vigilance wrapped around his bones. Carl received confirmation that multiple refugee centers had already begun reintegration programs. The progress exceeded expectations. He rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed by the way human resilience always seemed to outrun despair when given the slightest chance to breathe. Lily stepped outside during recess and looked at the sky, imagining the path Ryan was taking through the clouds. She felt a nervous flutter in her stomach, the kind that comes before life-changing moments. She wondered how much each of them had changed, and how they would rebuild the bond stretched so thin by distance. Jeff returned to his office and turned off his phone for the first time in weeks. Silence settled over him gently. He realized that influence did not have to roar to make impact. Sometimes it moved like a quiet tide, reshaping a coastline over time. He felt a sense of purpose flaring stronger than before. Ryan touched the small photo of his daughter tucked into his pocket. He imagined her running toward him, arms open, unaware of how close he had come to losing everything. Tears gathered in his eyes, but did not fall. Instead, they settled like a promise inside him, one he would honor with the rest of his life. Carl stood by his office window, watching the city hum with ordinary routines. It struck him how miraculous normal life seemed after months of chaos. He placed his hand against the glass, reminding himself that he had helped steer history toward a gentler path. It was enough to quiet his restless thoughts. Lily prepared her home for Ryan's return, adjusting furniture and cleaning counters, though nothing truly needed attention. She simply needed movement to contain the growing anticipation. Every sound made her turn her head, imagining footsteps finally coming back to her door. Jeff ended his day watching the sun sink behind the skyline. He knew critics would attempt to twist the narrative, but he also knew the truth would speak through the families reunited, the soldiers returning, and the communities rebuilding. Real change left traces no political argument could erase. Ryan stepped off the transport vehicle onto familiar soil. The air smelled like home, warm and grounding. As he walked toward the waiting area, he saw Lily standing alone with trembling hands pressed to her mouth. He felt the world narrow to the space between them, and everything finally made sense. If this story touched your heart, comment your favorite lesson below. Jeff walked through the quiet morning streets weeks later, watching a world that seemed softer than before. Families moved with a sense of relief, and news channels focused more on rebuilding than on destruction. He knew peace was fragile, but he also knew he had helped prove that change could begin with a single choice. Ryan held his daughter in his arms, breathing in the scent of home as if it were the first clean breath he had taken in years. The nightmares still whispered at night, but now he had something stronger than fear to anchor him. Every sunrise felt like a second chance, a promise he would no longer waste. Lily watched Ryan settle back into ordinary life with a gentleness that surprised both of them. They talked slowly, relearning each other with patience, shaped by separation. The war had carved scars in him, but it had also cleared space for a deeper gratitude neither had known before. Carl continued his work behind the scenes, ensuring that relief teams reached every region in need. He rarely spoke about his role in the peace process, preferring to let outcomes speak for themselves. Quiet impact had always felt more dignified to him than recognition. Jeff stood once more at his window overlooking the city. The world was still imperfect, still volatile, still learning. But it had taken a step towards something better, and he had taken one with it. He realized then that real wealth was not measured in billions, but in the courage to rewrite what everyone assumed was unchangeable. If this story made you think, subscribe for the next one.